Oh, I had my notes pulled up instead of the script. I was like, Inside Mansion. Anyway.
You have to keep that in the edit. I'm sorry.
Welcome to X-Men Evolution, episode 32 of Cyclops is Waiting for Me, an X-Men animated recap podcast. I'm Rod. I'm kind of drunk and confused.
And I'm JC. Like I've said before, you could watch me on Sunday nights live streaming on twitch.tv/whiskey and waffles. Cyclops is Waiting for Me is our weekly podcast series where we're going back, you fucked me up here, and watching every single X-Men animated episode that we can find. This podcast started with the original 1992 X-Men the Animated Series, building up to the release of X-Men 97, which we happily know is coming out for sure on Disney Plus in less than 1 month on March 20th. But until that happens, we're going to be covering other X-Men animated series like this one, X-Men Evolution. So it does mean we will be taking a break from Evolution during the release of X-Men 97, so we're able to recap those episodes on their release week.
And we mentioned this in the previous episode, but the plan is now the 97 episode releases on what? Wednesdays, and then we'll probably record the day after, and then they'll post on the following Monday.
Yeah, we're going to try to keep as close to we can as our regular posting schedule as possible, pending, life doesn't get in the way, whatever. But we're going to do our best.
So some quick reminders. We're a recap show about a series that started over 20 years ago. There will be spoilers. If you don't want it spoiled for you, pause the podcast, watch the episode, and come back. We are currently not sponsored by or affiliated with Marvel Animation, Disney, or Disney Plus in any way.
Don't forget to follow us on social media at Cyclops IWFM Pod on Instagram, TikTok, Threads, even though I don't think either of us has posted on Threads in 3 months. X, which pains me to say it out loud, and Facebook. And of course, make sure that you're following us on your favorite podcast services because it will auto-load for you. You literally don't need to do anything. It will just pop up and say on Monday mornings, you have a new episode.
Yeah. Today we're going to be talking about Season 3, Episode 2, titled The Stuff of Heroes. It also aired on September 21st. Okay, so...
that was not an also. That was me fucking up the script.
Oh. Okay, it aired September 21st and currently sits at a 7.9 star rating on IMDb.
Also a top-rated episode according to IMDb.
Yeah, it was up there. In basically a continuation of both Season 2, season finale, and the last episode, the opening episode of Season 3. We got another previously on. This was an interesting hybrid one because it was a previously on that just seamlessly went into an actual cold open.
Right, it flowed into the show, and there was no cut to signify that it wasn't.
Yeah, it was. I think the first news shot was the hole in a ceiling of the mansion or something.
Yeah, it literally went right into the danger room, destroyed, and I was like, wait, what?
Yeah,
I totally had a double take moment from it because it flowed so seamlessly there, no doubt.
Yeah, and it looks like there's investigators or detectives. They're in the danger room, and they just see this giant blade. They're like, "What the hell were they doing in here?"
That's a fair question.
Yeah, and I think later they show a wider shot of that, and it's that big ball thing with all the death instruments hanging off it. I'm like, what the world? And then
I understand why people are scared of mutants.
Yeah, and then outside there's a reporter outside the mansion talking about what happened here, and the turrets on the outside start pointing at her, and the cops are like, "You got to get out of here." She's like, "I got to report the story." He's like, "You're gonna become Swiss cheese here in a second."
We see a few other shots. You see a person in a hazmat suit picking up a massive pair of boxers, which obviously we assume have to be blobs because you could fit the entirety of the rest of the Brotherhood in one leg of those boxers. And then you see that cops are checking IDs with people because they're on the hunt for the X-Men because they've started IDing them, like we mentioned in the previous episode. And there's mention that, they look like normal citizens. And at that point, Rogue's picture flashes across the TV, and she's not happy with the picture because she thinks she looks fat in it.
But that's a total 2000s. I mean,
tropey as hell.
Yeah, then Logan is with her in the convenience store, and it's be quiet, we got to maintain a low profile. Meanwhile, she has no hood or anything on. He's got sunglasses and a hat and stuff.
Yeah, he at least looks a little bit different, and I haven't seen his face flash across TV yet.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Rogue is standing in front of the TV where her face is and posing almost identically to the pose that's on the television.
Yeah.
And then these cops, I guess soldiers.
Soldiers. I would go with soldiers.
Come into the convenience store. I guess it's just part of their like kind of general raid or whatever. And
I think they were legit just going and like getting food. I don't think they actually knew where they were.
Well, I mean, I guess I mean in the larger picture, because later on when they go outside, there's like a lot more of them. They were just already there, so maybe they were like on a break, but like they were just all in the sweeps and stuff. And Rogue does the opposite of what Logan said about keeping a low profile and like looks at them, almost poses in front of the TV.
Yeah, dead in the eye, like pose right there, perfect.
Then Wolverine gives him that look, and if this was anything other than like a children's TV show on Saturday morning or whenever it aired, you would say that Wolverine was going to kill them. But that's when it cuts to the opening title sequence.
Right. It literally depends if this was in comic form, what era was it written in and what imprint was it written in? Because I think I've mentioned to you in the past, in the 2000s, there was a group or a batch of imprinted comics called Marvel Max.
Okay.
And that was literally just like, oh, this is going to be the most hyper-violent shit. Like Wolverine was stabbing people left and right with no regard. So. Yeah.
Once again, we get the new season's updated intro. They didn't change the song at all either. So like, and it's fine, but like, I don't know. I just kind of filtered it out. And then we get the reveal that instead of killing the soldiers, Wolverine just like slashes a bunch of cans so that he can distract them to beat them up.
I love that the dude basically concusses himself because Wolverine, splashes something in the guy's eye, basically. It makes him shoot the taser into the air, which knocks down the light fixture that hits him in the face. Yeah. It was very much like he had a Rube Goldberg scenario that he did to himself.
And my note here was they cream the guy and run away. I think, would that have to do with like a bottle of like whipped cream or something they slashed open? I think that like blew up in the guy's face. It was a funny choice, like a pie in the face kind of escape. But it was just Rogue that escaped. She ran outside, grabbed Wolverine's motorcycle, and then rode back in. And then he had that like smirk of like he was like impressed.
He was impressed by her. Yeah. The sprinklers go off. At that point, you put it as they creamed on the guy. I put it that they kill a soldier with a whippet.
Oh, okay. I can see that, yeah.
Yep. There's a reason why we don't monetize on YouTube.
Yep.
And then the interesting part is he throws a newspaper at this guy's face, which was the New England newspaper, which doesn't exist. And it's just wet from the rain, and that stops this soldier. So he's the shittiest soldier ever, aside from the guy who got fired in the last episode. And then he cuts a hole through the wall with his claws to go out the back door.
I guess that makes sense. Instead of going out the front where there's more soldiers. And it got us a cool close-up shot of the claws going through something. And then there's a news report that...
Of the store. Yep.
Of the store being attacked and stuff. That segues to a report in Washington. And they show this hearing, because we're assuming it's like Congress or something.
Yeah, it's Congress, but it's very empty. For being Congress during a national emergency, I feel like there should be more people in that room.
Well, funny you say that. Currently, as we're recording, this is how bad it is. I don't keep up with politics. I'm not smart enough to a lot of times. Even I know right now, we're like 2 weeks from a government shutdown?
We're 2 weeks from a government shutdown basically every 4 weeks. So
we're 2 weeks away from a partial government and 3 weeks from a full. But I forget, either House or like one of the two is currently on recess.
Of course they are.
And won't be back until 4 days before the shutdown. The other part is also on recess and will only be back for another 4. So they only overlap for 2 full days before the shutdown happens. So right now, besides all the other clusterfucks of like everything going on right now with like shit, like there was like 4 or 5 mass shootings the last week or two.
Yeah.
And everything like government infrastructure. We're talking about like nukes in space and EMPs and things. And they're just all on vacation. They have the power to not be. But anyway,
I'm so happy I gave you that softball because I didn't know where you were going to swing for it, and you went for the fences, Rod.
Yep. So this is
accurate.
Not far off. You talk about Simpsons predict, evolution predicts, but
I do like the comment that right before Storm and Beast walk in, the congressman refers to them as concealed weapons.
Oh, yeah.
That is the guy who is definitely pushing for concealed carry permits to be legal everywhere.
I was going to say, when was that a concern of someone like this? Yeah, and then...
He very much had like a Rush Limbaugh or like a Ted Kennedy vibe to him.
Oh, I can see that, yeah. Yeah, and then Storm and Beast barge in. It's a nice little kind of, not callback, because I guess it's part of his character, but to see Beast again testifying, like he did in 92. And
I appreciate Storm's quote because she was basically saying, like, this witch hunt stops now. Mm-hmm. When you know about the character is she was seen as, a weather witch in her tribes and stuff like that in the story.
She lived through it a couple times, and I love how she like leaned into it. There was like no not that they could have like hid from it with Beast being there. She wasn't negotiating. She wasn't trying to like be gentle with it. Cut the shit out.
Yeah, let's fucking go.
Then we cut away to a train.
I gotta point out, it's a minor thing, dude, but we talk about the quality of animation between original 92 and then this. The fact that they literally went through the detail of when a train stops, of like, the first car stops, there's a little bit of a shake, and the second one, it was like, there was so much detail to that quality of animation that like sometimes I see online, like the show gets a little bit of hate for whatever reason. I get it. If you don't like certain character aspects and stuff, that is subjective. But this is objectively a well animated show. So I do not understand where, like, if you pay attention to that detail, like, you went hard on this kind of stuff.
That almost kind of makes me wonder if it was like partially computer animated or something, because it was an interesting, very small detail that would not have mattered to anyone.
I don't think the computer animation for 2D was that good back then to be able to do it. I think this was just well done, classic hand drawn.
Yeah, that was why. Now that you mentioned it, I remember seeing that too. It's like, oh, that's interesting. They're all stopping like a little bit after each other.
I'm going to go online after this is over and see if I could find animation cells, but I'm going to specifically look for the animation cells of the train and not have an X-Men in it. I could probably get it for like $12.
I would love it if you go to like WonderCon or something and you see one of the vendors have it and you're like, oh, you try to buy it and like, who wants this?
The guy is like, would you like more? I have the entire scene here. $7.
Yeah. He's like, oh, that's it. He's like, no, I'm paying you $7 to take them. This was a curveball to me. Was not expecting to see it. Juggernaut is just like sleeping.
So the only thing I gotta say is I had that unfortunately spoiled for me that Juggernaut was in the episode from like a listing or something I saw that's I just like out of the corner of my eye said his name. But even still visually, it was just like, wait, he's still locked up last we knew about.
Yeah, it was just, there was no, and we'll see later that it was purposeful that there was no transition to this. But it was like, what is he doing here? And I love how he's just kind of, I don't know, like suave about the whole thing. The guy tries to report him, the authorities come over and they're like, see? I'm like, look how big he is. He must be a mutant. I was expecting that line the Juggernaut always says about not being a mutant, but he didn't say it this time.
Well, because this Juggernaut is.
Oh, that's right.
Remember, this is one of the scenarios where he actually is a mutant. He's enhanced by the magic, but he's still a mutant as his base here.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
But he just kind of casually stands up and puts his helmet on and just
jumps through the ceiling of it. But here's the thing, man. Now in the back of my head, I forever have I'm the Juggernaut bitch in my head. He literally has the way he says I'm the Juggernaut, and it's like it's literally there, and I'm just like my brain is filling in the remainder of it.
Yeah. And then he just like kind of fucks off because he's like, what are you gonna do? Because they would probably all bounce off of him. We see that Scott and Jean and that whole crew have ended up in a cave somewhere.
Yep.
Jean, I think, mentions that Spike is trying to get a small portable TV to work so they can watch the hearing that Storm and Beast went to.
Let's do a quick pause on that. When you were a kid, did you have a mini portable TV?
I did not. I saw them around, but I didn't personally have one.
I never had one that was a standalone TV. I thought when I was a kid that the Game Gear add-on, which had the TV tuner, would have been the coolest thing to ever have. And then you realize how bad the antennas on those things were. And the Game Gear could, on 6 AA batteries, literally couldn't last the length of an entire episode of a TV show.
Yeah, that was the Game Gear's downfall as a whole, right? It was just battery life.
Yeah, it just sucked batteries out. And even like the rechargeable stuff, it did not matter.
Because that was Nintendo's strength, even to this day, where they focus more on the enjoyability of the product more than like the tech. Even the Switch. Put the Switch against like any console of the past 10 years.
Well, didn't they already say that like PlayStation is like at the end of its life cycle for PS5?
Already?
There was an announcement the other day that's what they said, and Nintendo's like, we're on 7 years, guys.
Of Switch, yeah.
Came out earlier, and we're gonna last longer because our Pokemon will run like shit, but you guys will still buy it.
But so their Game Boy, you could play Game Boy like all night, and be fine. Granted,
you might not be able to see the screen, but you could play it.
You would probably cut that life short by having to add like a worm light.
Yeah.
Stuff, but at least those were LED by that point.
Yep. But yeah, Scott at that point is, my exact phrasing is, he's being a pissy downer.
Yeah, and then my note was like, I like that Jean calls out Scott for sulking. He's evolving into the Cyclops that we know.
He wants to be out there looking for Xavier, and he's asking, like, why aren't we hearing from him telepathically? Like, wouldn't he be calling out to us and stuff like that?
This is good questions. I question Jean, though, because Jean's like, wherever Mystique hit him, he's safe. I'm like, where's your logic for that?
Safe could mean dead.
Yeah, I guess.
He could be literally in a safe.
Like, so far, Mystique has not exhibited any care for anyone's well-being.
No,
besides her,
except for Blob.
Yeah.
And they have, they're about to have their moment finally.
Yes. That was my note here, was Nightcrawler cock blocks them by trying to find a TV signal.
And I love that Scott even calls it out, where it was basically like, oh yeah, it's about as good as your timing. It's like, damn.
Oh, and then we were saying about the TV attachment for the Game Gear, like that portable TV thing. Most people listening to us are old enough to know this, but in case you're younger and don't remember them,
dude, we still have a few people who are under 18 that listen to the show, and I don't know why, but yeah.
You might be too young to remember this, but this is not an exaggeration. Like how he had to basically hang upside down and find the one right spot in the case. Like that's how the little portable TV signal would work.
Wasn't that a joke on Married with Children that they had to go into Fox viewing positions and they literally had to stand in different spots of their living room to get the TV to see certain channels because they were a network house and not a cable house?
So fun fact, as a kid, the only TV show in history I was
not allowed
was Married with Children. My parents let me watch everything. Like I played Mortal Kombat, when I was 10. And I wish I could ask them, but they to them it was so inconsequential they don't remember. I wish I could ask 80s, 90s mom and dad. In my head, I'm picturing them watching one episode and they're like, no, not this. We can't. No. But yeah, so I don't actually know a lot of Married with Children references because it was the only show I didn't watch a single episode of.
Here's the thing. I don't know if it would age well. It probably wouldn't age well. So I don't think you want to go back to it.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of rose-colored glasses about that show. So
the only thing I remember, because it was probably the closest thing to a meme at that point, was Al putting his hand in his pants and sitting on the couch and then pausing on him. And was that a scene change or the end of episodes or something?
That was at almost every episode.
And so, and to the point where either the Simpsons or Family Guy parodied it, where he just had a toilet next to his couch and he flushed it after putting his hand down his pants.
After he said no peg.
Yeah. That was basically
I know the exact shot from The Simpsons you're referring to, yeah.
That and Christina Applegate, right? That's where her first big gig was.
And Faustino, that was where his first gig was too.
Oh.
And then before she was the voice of Leela, oh my god, why am I blanking on the actress's name?
Oh yeah, Sons of Anarchy and...
Yeah. Oh my god, why, I feel like the worst person.
Yeah, all I can think of is Peg Bundy. And I didn't even watch the show. I just know her so much for that look with the big bouffant and everything. I don't even know if that's the right hairstyle, but...
Katie Seagal. That's who it was. Yep. People were definitely screaming at their car stereo during their commute when we could not get that right. X-Men.
Yeah, Nightcrawler finally finds a spot where the TV is going to work, but he literally has to hang upside down and hold his arm out. And he's like, oh man, I'm going to get tired this way. And Kitty is like, I did not call anything that happened in this next 20 seconds.
The next 20 seconds is some of the funnest moments of this entire episode by far.
Kitty's like, don't worry, I got it. And then she holds her hand up, and I'm just, my real-time thinking is like, so she's just volunteering to stand there?
Right.
And then she's like, Bobby... And then Bobby makes an ice statue, Sub-Zero's her basically, and then she phases out of it, so her ice statue
is still holding the phone.
Holding the phone
or the TV, not phone.
The
oh TV. God, we're old.
Is holding the TV, and then everyone's trying to gather around it, but it's such a small screen because in reality that was probably a 3 or 4 inch screen, and they can't quite see everything. So then Bobby makes a ice magnifying glass. Before
even that, Kurt teleports in front of everybody, and then Kitty phases through him to watch the screen.
Yeah, and then he says, "You're invading my space." I was like, "She is literally inside of you."
That is cool. No, this is now. No, now it's your clip because you fucked me 2 weeks ago on the clip. It's got to be fair, Rod. For every offensive thing that you turn into a clip using my voice, we got to use one back for you.
Yep. I'll own it because that's what happened. But so then Bobby makes the ice magnifying glass, and they essentially have a giant flat screen, or the '90s version of a flat screen, right?
Yeah, he makes a tube TV out of the ice. So
it's the flat screen where the front's flat, but then there's 20 feet behind it. So then they get to watch the whole hearing. On the news, they're showing pictures of the Danger Room,
Yeah, and that's where you see like the giant like death traps and such.
Yeah.
Because Storm is basically like, yeah, we've been around for years without any incident, and then the congressman is like, bam, giant buzzsaw.
Yeah, he's like, and what is this? And was it Storm or Beast? I was like, oh my, like, it's like.
I feel like it was mutual on that one. Yeah.
And then we cut away to Rogue and Logan, and they're on their motorcycle fleeing from like copters and just all the military and stuff. Rogue says something like duck, and Logan's like, what'd you say? And then he just gets clotheslined by a tree.
Yeah. After they crossed over a giant tree bridge, which I feel like this has like become a trope here because they've done it in it. I unfortunately just watched Aquaman 2, and there's like a weird fake tree bridge thing.
You watched that?
It took three settings to get through the entire thing.
Was the villain who I told you, or what I told you it was? It's not even a who.
I don't even remember at this point.
Okay, spoiler, skip 10 seconds if you don't, but you shouldn't. This is a terrible movie.
It's worth getting spoiled to not have to deal with it.
Was it greenhouse gases?
Nope, different one. They changed it.
Interesting, okay.
Yep.
Was, who, like, in the movie a lot? Like,
yeah.
Okay, so
we'll catch up after.
Okay.
But yeah, I feel like there's like this weird trope of like fake bridges and stuff like that like what we thought was going to be like 80s quicksand was going to be a thing to deal with. He was just like, they're just using trees to be bridges to cross rivers and shit all over this show. But yeah, she yells for him to duck. He does not understand that because he's too concerned with the paint being scratched, and then he gets clotheslined right off the back of it.
Yeah, then he yells at her to like let him drive, but there's no time because the military is catching up with him fast, so he just crawls up on the motorcycle and they like barely get away. We get back to the hearing. They do a lot of scene back and forth. You had to kind of keep track of where everybody was.
Yeah, it was a little frenetic, but I think it
was meant to be.
Led to the urgency of what was going on. Jump back over to Congress. Beast is saying like, yeah, the Sentinels attacked us. All we were doing was defending ourselves. And then the congressman is like throwing up total false flag operation vibes when he's like, well, maybe you built it yourselves and then it went haywire. And it's like, that's a leap to go that far. So they're mutants, but they're also scientists who are programming these giant robots that then turned on them because the AI is that bad? Like, okay.
Yeah, just
dude watched Terminator and just did not understand that it wasn't where technology was at that point.
And then Wolverine and Rogue skid into the cave. So
they
were on their
bust
way
through the TV.
Oh yeah. And so the hearing stuff ends, or the hearing doesn't end. Their viewing of the hearing ends, and the military catches up with them. Like I think either Gene or Scott, I think it was Gene, was like, you're gonna lead them to us, and then they just appear. It's like, was it Rogue? I think it was Rogue. Or like, they're gonna be here soon. And they're like, oh,
yep, they're here.
Yeah.
I would think Logan better tactics than to not try to lose them before going back to the hideout.
I guess to his credit, he did yell at her to drive. He wanted to drive.
Yeah, but he could be like, turn left. And that's where we crashed a commercial. So we come back, and then you hear the first time they use the muties slur in the show.
Oh,
and it's one of the guys from the helicopter who's like, it's crawling with muties. It was a really pointed phrase. It's like, oh, they're, it's like when in World War II, it's like calling a German a kraut. It was like, now you're laying down the enemy vibes to it. Now it's not just you doing your job of getting to somebody.
Yeah. And then Wolverine's just getting ready to like, make a deli meat out there.
Right. And Cyclops holds him back. And then Bobby builds a giant wall of ice in front of it.
Cyclops and Wolverine are arguing because Wolverine's just getting ready to like go feral on the soldiers. And Cyclops is like, we're not going to kill them.
Which I guess is good from a cover perspective, but like they have missiles and machine guns and shit. You're making ice. Fuck you, Mike Prasad, for the ice wall.
I forgot that happened.
Yep.
I guess not. Also, if you want to spike Mike's car anywhere in LA,
you can make that a second clip, and we'll dedicate that right to Mike.
It's so funny. He showed that to us like months before he revealed it to you. We're like, Mike, when are you going to show me?
So, for people who don't know, on Whiskey and Waffles, we had a D&D podcast, and one of our players eternally used the ice wall as a spell, and then 2 years later met up with him for his birthday, and his license plate now says ice wall.
And bonus points, Mike has a tricked out Tesla that has one of those digital license plates. It's like digitized on the back of his car.
I hate it. I hate it so much. You get really the first conflict between Wolverine and Scott. Like, this kind of feels like the early vibes for what we see with them as characters later as adults and stuff like that. And he goes, listen, kid. And Cyclops balls up, man. He goes, "We're not kids anymore. We're the X-Men. You trained us." And he goes, "We're good." And he shoots the missiles, and then he goes, "We're very good."
Yeah, that was a cool scene. And then Wolverine just kind of like, all right, well, fuck you then. And then they literally part ways at that point. Logan escapes in one direction, and then the entire rest of the team scatter, but in the same general direction, and they escape the cave.
Which I love that because, the copter is ready to shoot missiles at the front of the cave, and Nightcrawler teleports with Kitty. I hope to God, for the sake of that pilot, that Kitty knows her missile systems well, because she does her whole phase through the circuitry thing to break his weapons. It's like, what if that was a different helicopter and then he just crashed because you took out his actual, controls? So
I just assumed all those airborne military people died in that whole pursuit, because everybody, because then Jean, she stalls 2 copters, but then just goes full on like Magneto with them. Like,
did you notice she took the propellers and made them in the shape of a heart?
Yeah, that's why I meant, like, she went Magneto with them, because she stalled them, crashed them, and then like bent up, but it was like such a slow crawl. It reminded me of the way they did Magneto's powers in the X-Men movies. So they made like this like rough heart shape, and I was like, okay. Then we cut away to another location that looks similar. I'm not sure how close everything is, but it's also woods-like, where this
which is accurate for outside of New York. Like, once you get outside of New York City area, you could get into the woods of like upstate New York, which is like literally 10 miles north of New York at this point. There's just tons of woods over there.
Yeah, for a while. And so we see this news truck. We're not assuming it's not the same one as before.
I started laughing as soon as this happened, because the news truck is driving up, and all of a sudden, just a police car gets thrown at them.
He's like, no sign of mutants yet. He's like, wait, scratch that, mutants. Yeah. But then when they go over like that hill, it's not just one cop car. It's like all of them decimated. And we see that as Juggernaut just like throwing them around like toys.
Yeah. And the one cop who isn't like dead or injured is like, "We need backup, send the army."
Oh yeah, because he was like, send backup, and then whoever's on dispatch is like, how many? And he's like, let's start with the army and go from there. And once again, what is the dispatch thing? He's like, what the hell is going on out there? Like,
they don't have live feeds or anything like that. It's literally just them on like a walkie-talkie at this point. You go back to Congress, and they're talking about all these atrocities and stuff like that. And then they show the Juggernaut on screen live in Congress, where they just have apparently a giant flat screen monitor in the wall of Congress, and he's literally flipping a tank on the camera.
He said, what about the 63,000 people below the dam? Because I guess they're assuming that Juggernaut's going there to like break the dam and just like flood town or city that's down there.
And then it jumps over to seeing all of that on TV in the Velocity, and Jean and Scott are both in shock because the Juggernaut is loose and they had no idea.
Yes, like us, like they're all on the ride with us. We're like, what is he doing there?
So we come back, I believe, from commercial there. Juggernaut is at the dam. You have people that are evacuating. The news van is there at the dam, and Juggernaut just starts attacking it, and that's when 2 copters show up.
Yeah, so he takes them down, and then Nightcrawler...
Well, they shoot the shit out of him with missiles first.
Yeah.
And he just like crawls out of the rubble.
And then Nightcrawler like teleports in and then saves the soldiers.
Yep.
Meanwhile, Juggernaut is fighting all the X-kids down there.
So he literally jumps from the rubble and like lands on one of the helicopters, basically head through it, and causes the copter, which lands on its own on top of the dam, even though it was like literally doing flips in the sky and shit like that. That one was a little bit much. And you see that Scott is holding off because he doesn't want them to get blamed the same way they are for the Sentinel attack. And then I believe the exact phrasing was like, well, what would Professor X do? But I wrote it as WWCXD. Oh. So instead of what would Jesus do, is what would Charles Xavier do? And, he turns the Velocity around, and they make their way to the dam. Juggernaut is attacking the other helicopters, and that's where Nightcrawler saves the pilots. And he drops them right in front of the news anchors and like gives like a smile and wave to the camera.
Oh yeah, the little almost thumbs up.
Yep. You see a few things like, Jean is trying to like throw him with the telekinesis. Scott is shooting him onto the ice that Bobby makes, and it actually like knocks him off the edge of it. And then he looks up, and it's like there's no X-Men up there. He goes when he sees Spike, who's hiding in the Transformers, and he jumps in them, and like Spike must have a death wish because that's the best spot to get killed.
And then Kitty grabs Juggernaut and phases him through like a metal block and then leaves him there halfway through.
I think it was a stone block, but yes.
Stone?
Yeah, I think that was stone.
But his torso
it was like the way it was solid, like cement style.
His torso was stuck in that solid object and he was still alive.
So based on what we've seen in the past few episodes with Kitty, I think the way that they're treating her power is if you phase somebody into something and then release the phase, whatever you phase them into is still around them, but not in the shared space anymore. It's almost like whatever that was like where his torso was is now just gone and disappeared magically for forever. I think that was their concession to be able to use the power without it being lethal.
It like displaces like water or something. Except, there's like disappearance of volume. We're talking about physics in cartoons. And then Jean uses a telekinesis to like bring the water back up to the broken part of the dam.
Yep. And then Bobby freezes it. I
don't know how long that lasts in an area that's not snowy.
Not long enough.
But, sure. Meanwhile, Nightcrawler teleports onto Juggernaut and just unlatches his helmet. They've been through this before.
Yeah, because that last episode where it took multiple people, each different angle doing one latch each, Nightcrawler was luckily able to get all of them before is able to grab him.
And then Cyclops blasts his helmet off. Then my next note is both accurate and not. Cyclops raw dogs Juggernaut.
So the way I wrote down the notes is the Juggernaut says, "I am raw power." Cyclops responds with the worst possible phrase that could have been written there, which was "take it raw."
Yep.
And then he removes his visor, and there is zero control to his blast because he's basically unleashing, and he almost kills the TV crew.
Yeah, I was also wondering, it looked like too that it was gonna like re-destroy the dam.
Yeah. Like all he had to do was like tilt his like eyes down like 1% and they would have all been gone.
Because it was like the width of the screen or the shot.
Yeah.
It was wild. And
yeah,
to the point where you saw his eyes.
Yeah, it was everything. And everybody else is just kind of like standing off to the side, like hopefully he doesn't turn towards us because we're all gonna get fucking concussed to hell.
But it's kind of like it's almost, it didn't do as much to Juggernaut as I thought it would. It was more of like a fire hydrant, that opened up on him. It was like annoyance more than anything else because he was shielding it and then pushing it away as he was kind of getting closer to Cyclops.
Yeah, the fire hydrant is a great metaphor for what it looked like.
Juggernaut gets close enough to Scott where he just like grabs his head to cover his eyes. He palms him, his whole face.
I mean, honestly, if this was not a Saturday morning cartoon show, with what was going on, that was close to being a Game of Thrones scene of like somebody's head just being crushed in someone's hand,
Head. I haven't seen Game of Thrones. The visual I got though was Wanda in Multiverse of Madness with Black Bolt. It's like kind of like
just like squeeze, squish. Yep. Then obviously Scott gets lucky because Rogue and Kitty phase up. Rogue takes the gloves off as Nightcrawler is able to teleport Scott out of there, and she goes for it and she starts absorbing Juggernaut.
Mm-hmm. And she has better control of it now because she's not as like traumatized. I guess she's done it before with him.
Yeah.
She goes toe to toe with him.
He goes to take a swing and she catches it and does like the backhand pimp slap to knock him on his ass.
Yeah, and then he falls off the top of the dam and Iceman traps him in like a casing of ice as he falls into the river.
Yeah, he makes him an ice cube basically.
I'm glad that they kind of addressed this because in cartoon logic, that's the end of it. He's defeated. But like in real life, he's like, once he hits that water, he's going to quickly like dissolve, like thaw out and be out. And so they actually talk about that. They're like, should we go get him? He's like, no, he's long gone now. We're just going to deal with it later. I'm like, okay, at least you acknowledge that wasn't like a permanent or even close to permanent solution.
Yeah. And at that point, you see back in Congress, Storm and Beast are like, see, we use our powers for good.
Yeah, the politicians were watching. It's like, what was that? And I think it was Beast. It was like, that's us being the good guys.
Yeah. And then back at the dam, the army is already looking for him, can't find him. And to your point, he's already gotten out of there.
I personally thought this was like a clever little way to reveal his information. They're checking up on Rogue because she's always like exhausted after these like absorptions and stuff. And he's like, how you feeling? She's like, it's like usual. And she's like, but I know where Professor is. I was like, wait, what?
Well, because she faints into Scott and Jean, and then she's like, no, it's good, but I know where he is.
And it's confusing at first because like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, because this seemed like a complete off story, you know, another nuisance. Then they cut away to the vat that Juggernaut was once imprisoned in,
right?
And Xavier's in there,
and the guard's like, "We didn't know." It's like, do you guys check on this fucking dude?
Yeah. Well, like we said, there's only like 1.5 people that work there.
Yeah, apparently.
At any given time.
The most secure facility is completely automated, apparently.
Yeah. And Xavier's in there, which, you know, kind of props to Mystique, because like, where are you gonna, you know, imprison a telepath? Is like a place where he's like incapacitated by like whatever that gel is that subdues people.
The show loves gel as a way to take people down, man.
I mean, that was kind of the 90s, 2000s, right? Was like,
can't shoot them, gel them.
Yeah, well, just like in toys and like everything was like translucent and stuff and slimy. Yep. They find him in Juggernaut's vat, and then Wolverine joins them there
in a new uniform.
Yeah, I feel like there's a backstory there that they're going to come back to maybe.
So the interesting part is that uniform, from a visual perspective, looks a lot like the uniform that he would wear in the comic book Ultimate X-Men that was referenced by the Evolution Wiki. But I absolutely like... That's instantly where my mind went to it too. Granted, I haven't picked up the Ultimate X-Men books for a decade, but it absolutely reminded me of that suit.
So I hope they come back to this at some point of like show like one. I think you described it before as like an Ocean's 11 moment. We need to see where Xavier got taken over by Mystique.
Yep.
And now we got to see like how the hell she swapped out fucking Juggernaut with Xavier.
Yeah.
Because not only is it tough to get into, or supposedly tough to get in that place, but also like.
With a body with her, yeah.
Yeah, in being that size. But then also, like, transporting the world's most powerful telepath to that location. Or maybe she tricked him to going there. Maybe that was the whole thing. But that was, yeah, so Wolverine shows back up to, I guess, this sort of signified, like, the unity again.
So that's actually the only problem I have with this entire episode. I didn't like, and this is actually to the same degree because, you know, I didn't like the movie, but at the end of Eternals, when it's like, oh, all's forgiven, I don't care that you left us during the big fight to go do your own thing, I felt like it was a very similar vibe here. Granted, it wasn't as bad of a scenario, but it was like, he literally let them deal with it on their own. And it was like, him saying good job, it's like, no, you should be saying I'm wrong.
Yeah. So they're almost between that inexplicable like re-entrance and the new outfit and everything, there has to be some other story that's gonna like fill the gaps. It doesn't feel like that kind of show yet, but there's too many things now that have happened between that and Mystique and the Xavier swap and the Juggernaut swap and stuff. There's gonna be something that reveals that. And then it segues to the president giving like the opposite speech that he did at the beginning, where he's pardoning specifically the X-Men.
Very much calls them out directly.
And I'm still kind of unclear if in this world, part of the reason that they were doing like the witch hunt that they were doing was that they thought the X-Men were the only mutants. And in their mind, maybe the Brotherhood is folded into that too, because they don't know any better.
And if you look at what the visual of the fight scene was, it was all the mutants together against the one Sentinel. So you wouldn't even really read that there are two separate groups.
Yeah. And then apparently they did their 5 minutes of research and figured out that Trask was the one that built the Sentinels, and said that he was being arrested.
In the speech, he specifies, you know, my fellow Americans, all fellow Americans, human and mutant, which is a pretty bold political move, even in 2002, because you're basically being like, they're us. Like he's actually dropping a line in the sand pretty early of, we need to treat them like we treat each other.
Yeah. I mean, both early for the story, but to me, it was like early in the episodes for the season. I thought this was going to be a longer conflict.
I thought it was going to be the majority of this season was going to be that conflict.
Yeah, so apparently now the government's good with the X-Men. We don't know how for how long.
Yep.
But then there's that like warm, uplifting music, and we finally have a happy ending for once. There's been quite a few episodes where it didn't end quite as well for the X-Men.
So I said, like, from a character perspective, I don't think Wolverine should be forgiven that quickly by Scott. But the only other thing from like an art perspective that was interesting to me is the mansion was shown destroyed, but already kind of like overgrown with plants in the wide shot. And it's like, this has been like a few days. Like I know shit gets overgrown, but not that quick.
Mutant plants? I don't know.
It's actually Krakoa.
Or they left one of the students there and his powers were plants things, botany, I don't know.
That would be Black Tom.
There you go.
But yeah, so you see all the students are there, and there's like this, like, I know it's not called a panning shot, but I'm also not somebody who's like a DP, so I don't know what the actual term for it is, but it's like the camera spinning around and you see all of them striking a pose in various spots, all in uniform. And you get the last line from the president of like, you know, we need to learn more. We need to be open-minded. And basically it's like, we need to be better.
Yeah.
So he's like, we jumped to a conclusion and we fucked up, guys.
Yeah, because I was just actually talking to a friend about this the other day. Like, even in this show, it's fictional, but in the real world, similar. Like, life tends to produce the things it needs. You know, and that I feel like that includes people. So, like, I've always seen it this way with the X-Men. Mutants exist because humanity needed the evolution of it, you know, for whatever reason. And so instead of trying to like work against progress, they should try to figure out where this fits in the big picture.
Yeah, how do we cross over in a positive way with it?
Yeah, because like it's already happening.
Mm-hmm.
You can't ever really stop those things, right? It's like trying to stop a tornado or something. Like,
yeah.
What's the point?
Well, and that's kind of the whole Magneto, you know, mentality of you can't stop evolution.
Yeah. So, and he, like Mystique said, he was kind of right. Like, they freaked out once again. Could have been a better first impression than fighting a giant robot in the middle of the street. But
yeah, and then the episode wraps up without any dialogue after the president's speech is done, where Magneto is watching a TV and you see Quicksilver, Colossus, and Magneto there, and he just has this like menacing, concerned look on his face.
He's like, drats, these meddling kids.
No, and that's how the episode wraps.
So I guess that's the season, is like maybe Magneto getting his retribution for the plan not working or something.
Yeah, and I mean, now we have to have a little more of a pitched battle where both sides are aware of what's going on with the Acolytes versus the X-Men. I also really kind of like in this show how you have 3 factions as opposed to there usually only being 2. I mean, actually, you have 4 if you count like Trask and his old crew.
Yeah.
Because none of them really see eye to eye with each other.
Yeah, because Trask isn't part of any government organization we know of so far.
Yeah. So, yeah, you got the X-Men, you got the Brotherhood, you got the Acolytes, and then you have Trask's group. And I'm sure his people aren't going to let him just sit in prison, you know?
Yeah. So, yeah, what Steven said, you know, what is coming is happening. Like, this is turned from a high school show into, like, a war.
Right. And then we know, obviously, from what happened in the previous season, we're going to have some sort of continuation of that apocalypse story, because there's no way you plant that seed and don't have a follow-up on it.
Hopefully. We don't know. We're watching this for the first time.
Well, and then the thing that we haven't touched on was all of a sudden all the kids are back and nobody has mentioned like, oh yeah, we were hanging out in the sewers with the Morlocks or with at least, because
that's right, yeah.
Because that happened, and then now this was the first time that all the kids are back at the mansion. And there's no dialogue to tell us what happened in between that.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. So we have stories with Caliban too. We gotta get back to lots of open ends.
Yep. And then the only other like trivia Easter egg I could find, and again, this also goes to the Evolution Wiki. They mentioned that when the news reporter was like jumping out of the way of being killed by Cyclops and such, the noise of like the grunts that she's making were actually the same sound effects from 007 GoldenEye for Natalia Simonova.
From like the movie or the game?
The game.
That's hilarious.
I do not have a copy of the game nearby that I could go check and reference that, but I thought that was too cool of like a random thing that if that's true, that's pretty fucking hilarious. As a reminder, we have 2 more episodes of X-Men Evolution that we will be recording and going live before the debut of X-Men 97, which comes out on March 20th. So that means our episode will go live on the 25th is when our first episode for episode 1 will go live.
Very cool.
According to the IMDb, which obviously could be wrong, it does have them coming out at a weekly posting cadence.
That would make sense if having like 10 episodes to spread it out.
I mean, dude, if they drop this all as one, it's like it would be great, but it would be awful for us from like a recording perspective.
Yeah. But also just for conversation, you want people talking about it.
Yeah, you want the vibe of like what WandaVision was and like people talking week to week. Like Echo, I thought was really good, but I don't think Echo would have worked as week by week drops.
Yeah, so. It was so short, both in the entirety of the series, but also like each episode. I watched it in a single Saturday because I didn't have time when it actually dropped. And Last Airbender live action is coming out, I think, a couple days from the time we're recording. I'm actually excited about that. I'm gonna watch like the first couple episodes to see if I think it's worth it, because it's really easy to do bad in live action.
I'm not an Avatar person, so I don't have feelings either way around it.
But they are releasing it all at once, which I thought was a choice because it's like 10 episodes. And
I
10,
think
like,
they just want to be like,
episodes.
look, we are not the M. Night Shyamalan live action.
Right? So I'm kind of, I think me personally, when it drops, I'm going to be busy working on stuff anyway. I want to kind of wait to see what the consensus is because I kind of trust the fan base.
Yeah.
With that. If it seems to be like, wow, this is great, then maybe I'll like spend a weekend and binge through it. But otherwise, I don't know. Yeah, the whole like what the release schedule is for shows is interesting. But weekly we'll see with X-Men. We'll see if it's like it makes sense to have like a week to week like suspense of the story and stuff. Or
Right.
like, damn it, I just wish we would have gotten 3 episodes all at once or something.
I feel like, though, if you do 3 episodes and then you go to week, it feels weird. Like, that's happened with, like, certain Amazon shows, and it doesn't. Like, you're like, oh, I just binged, and I'm like, now I have to wait a week to only watch one. It becomes a weird cadence to it.
I get that.
Yeah, like, they did that with, like, Invincible or something, or The Boys or something like that. Oh, it was Gen V that they did that with, and it felt weird.
Gotcha. They were probably copying off of one of the Netflix or Disney Plus shows did that. Some of the Star Wars things and stuff. And that kind of makes sense because you want to get like the feel or have the option to get the feel of what things are like before you dive into it. I know like you figured out how much you wanted to watch of Ahsoka.
I got 2 episodes into Ahsoka. I got less into, what's it called, Andor.
I fucking love Andor.
5 minutes into the 2nd episode, I'm like, no, I can't.
I will say that was a weird one to release 3 episodes or 3 or 4 episodes right at once because every 3 episodes was a completely different season. Like the first 3 episodes was one storyline, and the middle 3 was another storyline, and the last 3 were a completely different storyline. But I could see why I liked it outside of like the Star Wars thing. I just like really liked the story. Anyway, yeah, release schedule, interesting. But we're in the home stretch, 97.
It's so weird to say it, man. It's like I love it, but it's weird.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, as of today, we're like right at pretty much a month from when we're going to see that first episode. So anyway, any last thoughts on this one?
Nope, we're good to go.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us. If you have any thoughts, make sure to drop them into the comments for either the YouTube upload or official Instagram post about this episode. Like we said, we only have like 2 more episodes after this one before we're on to the show that we made this whole podcast for.
Yeah, it was literally to lead up to it. It's wild.
If you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on the podcast app you're choosing. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, and CastBox. I'm going to go make a sandwich.